A couple of things. The project is with migrant women, not refugee, and I wouldn't use the term authentic in developing this work. But that's probably a drama and theatre arts squeamishness rather than necessarily a linguistic one. So, to begin with, before I share my slides, I would like just to say thank you for joining me today. I know it's a kind of busy time of the year, and this talk really thinks about harnessing variation in writing a documentary theatre play. And I have to go through a few steps in really contextualizing, where the ideas come from, and how the project was facilitated before I'll jump into the examples with you today. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, before I make it, I might just come back into my computer's a little slow, sorry. Okay, before I jump into there, can I just get some nods on whether you can see this or not? Oh, wait 1 second, my computer's currently loading. Okay, fabulous. Helena, can you see my screen?
Yes, I have a blank screen with your cursor.
Oh, okay. Can you tell me what you see now?
Now your first slide.
Fabulous. Thank you. Okay, I will move on. So this presentation is informed by a new paper that I hope to submit to Multilingual in the new year. And although I've been exploring interactional sociolinguistics and linguistic anthropology since about 2015, I haven't yet submitted to a sociolinguistics journal. So this will be the first. And considering many of you are more language specialists than me, I would really love this presentation to gain as much feedback as possible on both the gaps, really, in some of the analysis I do, and also, your perspective on the methodology that I put forward. So today I'll propose a methodology for harnessing sociolinguistic variation when writing documentary theatre. And in this case, variation is understood as a design feature of language and as a system of signs that enact a continually changing social world, as proposed by Penelope Eckert. This definition follows the third wave of variation to go beyond the idea that variation originates as an outcome of social stratification. And interdisciplinary methodologies with performance studies and a background as a theatre maker and scholar see a different emphasis on the definition of the performative nature of varieties that come into being through social change. Instead, I emphasize the links between variation, performativity, culture, and knowledge. Through the performance studies, concepts, presence, and affect, which I will define later on. And within this, culture encompasses knowledge, defined as systems of knowledge and mental dispositions, according to Christine Jordan and Kevin Tutor, who are linguistic anthropologists. And thus, principally, I show how performativity and variation can contextualize knowledge within a performance making project. My methodology for harnessing variation when receiving the testimonies live, then listening to them, transcribing, adapting, and editing them into a play is driven by my memories of this performativity, which I will describe in more detail a little later. So this is the structure for the presentation. And it'll begin with a background of this play in a documentary and verbatim theatre context before providing an overview of both my methodologies for researching and facilitating the project and writing the documentary play. I will then focus specifically on my example of transcribing a character's testimony and interweave my analytical approach to variation as influenced by presence and affect. And I'll compare these to my own testimony finally to conclude before going to your questions. So Courage Songs was informed by a British and South African documentary, verbatim, and testimonial theatre field, which have been key areas to my research as both a theatre practitioner and a researcher for the past decade or so. And this is a documentary theatre play, which is defined as a written play script for performance that centrally carries and communicates testimonies and archives inspired by everyday lives and events. And I provide this definition given the language-orientated lens of this discussion, because alternatively, verbatim theatre is understood as play scripts that draw from word-for-word accounts of testimonies. While testimonial theatre, largely in South Africa, is defined quite similarly. There's a focus on the word-for-word accounts of testimony. So by assimilating the words, word for word, the sounds of the street can enter the stage within verbatim theatre. And Russian studies and comparative literature scholars Birgit Baumers and Mark Lipovetsky even go as far to suggest that in verbatim theatre, social reality has been replaced by its linguistic equivalent. Theatre has replaced stage action by language. An exaggerated example of this is in American performer and theatre maker Anna Devere Smith's recorded delivery technique, whereby, that was later adopted by British theatre maker Alicky Blythe, whereby the interviewer transcribes the words word for word, and then the actors in their rehearsal and in the performance actually listen to the interviewee saying those words and sentences. And such a methodology for verbatim theatre emphasizes the central subjects, linguistic resources, and delivery, of course. It aligns phonological variation, including pace and pitch, with truth-telling, suggesting that these words are exactly as the interviewer has heard them. Performance scholar Amanda Stewart-Fisher proposes that this approach results in verbatim plays that celebrated local stories and effectively captured the vernacular speech of the region. And additionally, the word-for-word nature of the process from testimony to transcription to script has tended to avoid linguistic standardization as a result of this word-for-word approach. And linguistic standardization in that sense is understood as ideological and grammatical processes of rephrasing text so that it's closer to the national language standard. And language and humanities scholars Sandra Janssen and Natalie Braber emphasize how in this country, linguistic standardization conflates two distinct sociolinguistic phenomena, the standard language and the elite establishment sociolect. And so although verbatim theatre avoids linguistic standardization, the word-for-word approach to delivering stories has been disproportionately connected to truth-telling and the representations of the real. There have been immense tensions, I believe, with assumptions and assertions for word-for-word testimonies that see audiences oversee the fact that the interviews have still been edited from masses of data to be structured into a very well-made play. 2, the spectator is disproportionately privileged in these circumstances, with key dramaturgical decisions made with the spectator in mind, or what I have previously called the spectatorial gaze. Arguably, methodologies such as the recorded delivery technique are chosen for the truth-telling to the audience, rather than the care of the interviewees, cultures, languages, and knowledges. For these reasons and many others, I selected the documentary theatre format for Courage Songs. And however, with this decision comes further potentials for linguistic standardization, and I will discuss how I navigated these. So just as a contextualizing comment, Courage Songs really began in 2021 when I went back to Australia as a result of the Prime Minister's address. So I was living in the UK and I'd been living in Europe for 10 years. And I returned to live with my parents and continued working for the University of Warwick from there. And within that same year, my grandfather passed away, and I began conversations with his sister, who's the last surviving migrant from Ireland, from my family. And I became very interested in female experiences of post-migration and how labor within families, partners, even work can influence those experiences of post-migration. So the project was very much rooted in my own experience, and I started interviewing Elizabeth, my grand aunt, and then I got this job in Birmingham, and then I came back, basically. So it's kind of, you know, experiencing the phenomena as you're also writing about it and thinking about it. So as I came back, I began a project with a group of women in Birmingham that was titled Courage Songs. It was originally titled Our Songs of Courage, very similar. And this, I'll just go quickly to the overview of how I promoted this. And there's a very long story on how I developed this as a community-centered and flexible approach to storytelling and community building. But that's really like another presentation in itself, and I'd like to get through to the examples. But the main thing is that I planned on having it around April of that year, of this year actually. Gosh, this year's gone. It's been like 3 years in one, I think. And I started working with a woman named Fatia Begum, and she was doing a chorus or choral singing project called Cavalli Queens with a group of women, South Asian women mostly, in Lozells and Handsworth and Birmingham. And we realized the crossovers in what we were interested in doing. And I just joined the project. She said, come and meet everyone and then introduce your project to them. And the project is that, or is and was, that we would get together and women would bring a song with them to be able to talk about. It was really that simple. Really, to talk about, mainly to start with, the impact that the song had on their lives, and how they felt when they first heard it, and how they feel every time it's played back to them. And this again came from a personal point of view on how to bring about testimony in storytelling projects without re-traumatizing. And the idea was very much centered in like the opportunity for people to be able to come to the project and think a lot about what they're already interested in sharing. And so by having a sense of the songs that they would talk about and bringing it along with them, even if just in name, you know, they didn't necessarily have to prepare. And already thinking about that, the moment that they first heard that and the impact it had on them, it meant that there was a lot less of a focus on me as a facilitator really coming in and running the project. And also I shared my stories, I shared my songs. And so there was this lovely horizontality, which within the community and applied theatre discourses we're always looking for. And so that's kind of the structure of the Courage Songs, as we'll call it, even though the workshop project stage was called Our Songs of Courage. But for ease, I'll refer to it as Courage Songs because that's what the documentary play is called. And so even though, I'm coming back, even though it was supposed to start much earlier, I ended up joining this project and not actually really talking about Courage Songs for about a month of working with them. I was coming every week to the sessions of Cavalli Queens. And I really enjoyed kind of just being there and singing the songs. And there's also kind of a connection in my life at some point to Punjabi culture. So it was a slightly nostalgic and an interesting kind of personal response to that. But I built friendships with a group of women, mainly about 7 women, and 4 of whom came to our workshops in June. And it was only ended up being for like 2 weeks of 4 2.5-hour sessions within these 2 weeks, which is generally not enough to be able to build a documentary theatre project from, or a play in itself. But because of our friendships before then, we really deep dived into the sessions. And even though, you know, the offer was to bring one song. Most women came along bringing, you know, 3 or 4 songs every session, and they went for much longer than we really planned to. And it all became kind of messy in terms of a community theatre project, but was incredibly invigorating for all of us. So that's a bit of an overview of the project itself. I want to jump into really the next stages, but I'm aware of like giving you enough context in order for the next stages to really make sense. I think maybe just mentioning some of my research, because a lot of my theatre projects are practiced as research, and I don't really know, I mean, I had an idea about how songs were, playing songs that would be from other languages than the lingua franca in the room might allow for us to translanguage in the room, or code switch. And that was like a pressing question for it as a research project. And because of that, I thought, okay, I'll definitely record all the sessions, just audio recording. So I set up a microphone that was plugged into Zoom so that we didn't actually hear, you know, it wasn't through an amp, we didn't hear ourselves amplified through the microphone, and then recorded it all through Zoom without video. And so analyzing the kind of linguistic fluidity that might come about as a result of sharing songs was a key insight, but I haven't actually gone in that direction. I've actually ended up focusing on the variation in Englishes because of the rich play that has come out of this, and that's the joy of this type of research, is that you might have one research question, you end up with 15 at the end of the project. So I recorded the sessions. I created a consent process where all of the women signed consent forms where they could either be anonymous or not, because many people are interested in actually having their names within documentary theatre plays, and for that to be a starting point for them developing other types of artistic work, or that they just want it to kind of go down in history in a way with their names. The other women weren't interested in that and were worried about family and potential shame within South Asian communities, so they've become anonymous, and a lot of the names of people within their lives have obviously also been anonymized. That consent process is really important for me because people are constantly changing their mind and should be able to. And so at the beginning of the recording process, they signed it. Then I brought it back into the process at the end and just made sure that they're still comfortable with that and they can change details or unwrite themselves and decide that they don't want to be their stories to be part of a potential play or research. And then on the first draft process, which I completed in August, I will come back to the steps between those. I then brought out the consent form again as we sat down on Zoom and read through the first draft together, and they had opportunities to obviously change details, to talk about kind of their narrative arc and where they wanted to go and so forth. And then just recently, last week, we went through a second draft and have the same process. So that's kind of an ethics of how I work around documentary theatre. But again, I could do a whole session on the ethics of documentary theatre and how this process-driven approach can help to have actually the focus on communities and community building more than kind of necessarily a complete work that is from, you know, one editor, so-called, you know, or writer, me. So I come to the juicy part, I think, of this talk, which is the methodologies for writing this documentary play. So let me just find my notes, have a breather. My methodology for writing the play essentially involved remembering back to these storytelling sessions, listening through about 12 hours of recordings and correcting automatic Zoom transcriptions to begin with, and imagining a multiple protagonist story, and eventually building their lives. And my first step was really, as a gift to the women, I brought all of their individual discussions of songs together and then created like an audio memoir with the songs in between. bookending their testimonies, and then sent those to them. And that allowed for me to, one, provide them with something that was resonant of the experience of courage songs, because I didn't know what I would create as a play, and I didn't want there to be a certain kind of a certainty in there being a play. And it also allowed me to really think through their testimonies from their point of view, or try to, obviously. And I say that because I wasn't thinking about a potential audience the first time I heard the testimonies outside of the workshop space. And I think that made a big difference to the steps that came thereafter. So secondly, after correcting the transcriptions, I placed these as segments in a script and then coded these segments. I use software where I can have like all the kind of segments down one side, and I can see them and I can move everything around, and it becomes quite a visceral and almost brainstorming focused project or approach. And so I coded these segments with thematic categories such as stories about mothers, separation, love, partnership, or sickness, which were a lot of the themes that were coming up in these discussions of the songs. And at that point, I decided that it would definitely be a multiple protagonist play, which means that there are a number of main characters, each with their own dramatic arc. And that included me. I decided to write myself into the play. And the idea of that was because I thought that it could eventually, well, firstly, I thought it was an ethical alternative to showing the tensions between the outsider and the listener, for whom, you know, became a catalyst for these women to talk about their stories. And also to negotiate these types of storytelling processes so that the audience were privy to that interaction between who became Sarah, who was a character based on Claire originally, at my testimony certainly, and the women that were part of the project. And so that was really kind of the next step, is deciding that it was going to be multiple protagonists. They would all have their own dramatic arc. And that by dramatic arc, I mean, there's some rising tension. I returned to, like, there's a very traditional Aristotelian dramatic narrative, which suggests there should be some rising tension, and then you slowly reach a climax, and then within that there is conflict and some sense of resolve. But before the climax, you've got really, for the character, they work out kind of what they want, and there's something standing in the way of that. And then there's a transformation after they break through that, or someone helps them break through, or whatever it might be. And so for each of the characters, I developed this idea of the dramatic arc, and edited down the women's testimonies. And I practiced an approach to harnessing their variation, which I'll soon discuss in detail in relation to one character who became Uzma. So within this idea of kind of practicing an approach to harnessing their variation, I use the knowledge about the women's variation from when I was actually sitting with them. So there was a sense of memory returning back to the sessions. It wasn't necessarily just through the audio. And I realized this at some point in the process. And I use this once I'll turn to what this variation meant and so forth in a second. But once I understood the kind of key morphosyntactical or lexical variation within each of the women and how it might convey into a character, I then started building scenes in between this community project. And I focused very much on, like, you know, there's a character, Shalina, and she would go from the project into her breath work, and we would follow her as an audience on a screen and to her breath work, and then see her facilitate this breath work session. And then she would go home and see her son and have this conversation. So I built like these lives and the dialogue with their variation in mind. And I think that was a really important stage in thinking about variation, because it's something that playwrights do anyway. It's obviously develop vernaculars of speech for their, I'm using terms that playwrights might use, vernaculars of speech for their characters, and the lexical, focusing on words that might come up for that character. Are very typical things. And so then that process saw a first draft completed. So the writing of the scenes and kind of embedding those in and around the moments within the community project. And the moments within the community project offered a sense of what they weren't necessarily providing within the other scenes, and vice versa. So it was kind of another chance to see them in the other contexts of their lives. So then I wrote a second draft, and that's, as I mentioned, I've just completed that and read it with the women. And this involved very different processes of trying to develop an overall dramatic arc in addition to the multiple protagonists. And that is because documentary theatre often it is quite fragmented, and it does focus on the pluralities of many people's lives, and that's also it's one of its strengths. But in so doing, it can sometimes feel like you're witnessing a narrative that happened before. And so to create a sense of liveness and tension, I then changed the Claire character, who became Sarah, into a slightly more naive person who learns a little bit about what she's doing through the process, which of course I learned a lot, but I separated her from me in that draft in order to then build a sense of tension in the project itself, and for the audience and the women to be like, what the hell are you doing here? Pretty much. And that was quite fun. And it also allowed for me to bring in research about the ethics of working with the other into this dialogue. I'm still working on it. The second draft isn't quite there. So very quickly. So this is the first song of the play, and it comes within a scene that I'll soon share. And the scene's taken from the first day of Courage Songs workshops and selected because of the particular memories that I have from this interaction that I'll link with performativity. So according to Penelope Eckert, again, the expression of social meaning exists on a continuum of decreasing reference and increasing performativity, with sociolinguistic variation at the performative extreme. And in other words, variation involves performative variables that include both embodied and linguistic resources, such as morphosyntax, voice quality, prosody, and rhythm. And Eckert suggests that they are performative in the extent to which the speaker's body and subjectivity enter the means of expression. This view of performativity draws from J.L. Austin and Judith Butler in its focus on both the reality-changing effect of utterances and their reproductions. However, performance scholar Diana Taylor suggests that Butler's view of performativity instead opposes Austin's in the suggestion that Butler proposes as the regulating and citational practices are harder to identify because normalization has rendered them invisible. Whereas Austin suggests that the performative points to the language it acts. So if utterances subsume subjectivity into normative discursive practice, then they are not necessarily performative in the way proposed by Eckert. And this is where presence and affect help to situate the interaction between two people rather than an utterance on its own. Performance scholar Erika Fischer-Lichter stresses the unique relationship between the actor and the spectator, again, the interaction, right? In order to bring about performativity occurring through the bodily co-presence of actors and spectators who assemble at a certain time and place in order to share a situation and a moment in time. So if presence is the production, the transfer, and the acceptance of energy between interlocutors, then co-presence might be an acceptance between the spectator and the actor of this energy flow. So at this time, there was not really many, to return to the first day, there was not really many people in the room, just me and the woman who became to be known as Uzma in the script. And this was super intense for both of us because it was new and we were in a new space at the University of Birmingham. And we were both aware of it being recorded, and it felt like there was a lot of kind of pressure for us to do something. But interestingly, Uzma was very relaxed, and I could see that in her approach to the interaction that followed. She discussed the Lillibully, which I just played a part of, and when she first heard it in a car after being married to her husband while they were in Bangladesh. And in my process of listening to Uzma's testimony from this day, I realized that this is when I was back listening to the audio. I realized that I was referring back in my memory to this moment when I received her. I was co-present with her. And as a spectator to this woman, who in this essence, sitting upon a chair and me sitting in the audience into a microphone, was being an actor, performing. And I found the patterns that I was noticing in her lexical and morphosyntactic variables while I was listening after the fact were influenced by memories of this performativity. And through this experience, performativity might be understood as when the combined elements of co-presence and sociolinguistic variation provide an affective experience for the spectator. Thus, performativity isn't tied just to variation, but also to some reception of that variation I'm proposing. And I'm going to provide a closer example of this. So this is one, oh, no, I'll begin here. In this excerpt, which is it's a key part.
Sorry to interrupt, but I really can't see the slides working, and I'm still on the Lillibully slide.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Is anyone else experiencing that problem?
Yes.
Really? Oh, I'm so sorry. Gosh,
Yeah.
that's boring. Let me just come out and then play again, see how you go. Let me go through here. What about now?
Still the same.
I've got them here if you'd like me to share them instead of you, Claire.
Yeah, I'll just stop presenting and then share again. That way I'm a little bit, I like the pace of the slides rather than someone doing it for me. Try once more. What about now?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Should I keep it in presenter view? Or should I go in? How's that?
I think go in.
Yeah? So I've gone in now. What do you see?
We're still in editor panel.
Okay. So it's not picking up going in. Okay, so you're in the editor. What do you see now?
Yeah, you're moving about within the editor panel.
Okay, and you can see the excerpt of Uzma?
We can see Uzma's testimony excerpt, just it's a bit hard to read at this size.
Okay, what about if I do it like that? Is that better?
Oh yeah, that's better.
Okay, we'll work with what we've got here. I'm just thinking about any animations that I have that's going to make anything unreadable, but I think we're good from here on in. Okay, just do.
Could I just ask? Someone has their hand up. Is the the hand has gone down.
Okay, fabulous. So in this excerpt, which is it's a transcription that I was building as a way, just basically for myself, when I was building on creating patterns in their variation. And so I've used Jefferson's transcription conventions here, but only very lightly. So I've notated pause, as you will see in line 4. No, as you will see in line 6 on thous, slightly sibilant, and sorry, the emphasis on thous, and then pause in almost every line. And then I've also started to put some pitch in, but I was still deciding on how much I was looking at pitch. This, I understand for any linguist here, this is incredibly too flexible, but this is, I'm sorry, but this is also part of an interdisciplinary approach, is that I kind of use it as part of my process rather than necessarily an outcome to evidence my arguments. So we'll keep going. So this is part of the excerpt from Uzma's presentation of her story about Lilla Bully on this first day. And as she reads, so I'll read a few lines, but I won't read the whole thing. I say, and you can use the prompts to that sheet there as your story. Take me through the song in a moment. And she says, all right, okay. That song that I heard, Lilla Bully, was when we were doing the Cavalli in Birmingham. And that song just, okay, so I'll stop there for now. So in this excerpt, her voice quality is quiet, almost whispered, and she very much uses almost, I think, my introduction and our conversations before as a starting point for that. We did have a tendency to speak quite quietly to one another, and that almost encouraged an intimacy because of the breathiness of that whisper. And generally, that throughout this, it's a transcription that just runs like 2.5 pages here. It was over 3 minutes. She has consistent breaks of about 2 seconds between 3 word claims or expressions, phrases. And her intonation and breathiness is quite even. There was a really sense of a real sense of rhythm in her interaction here. And there was also a breathiness on the vowels. So even here, like, okay, there was like a kind of almost applosive. And so there's one key section of this that I would like to discuss, which is on the next page. And it's highlighted in blue, but I'm going to move through it fairly quickly. So Uzma emphasizes both it being really exciting, as well as the word myself. So really exciting is in line 26 here. Oh, it was really exciting. Yeah, he was looking forward, and that's it really. And in that, she's talking about getting married, this process of getting married. And this emphasis, these lines are said with greater pace and a slightly higher volume than most of the other testimony. And in this moment, I felt affected, particularly by this kind of sense of co-presence between us, this energy flow, if you will, from Uzma, through how she modulated her physical relationship to me and my memory of that. Her breathiness, her slow pace, she had this comfortable posture and a more definitive and passionate emphasis on the process of getting to know her husband. And Uzma's definitiveness seemed quite marked to me because as an Anglo-Celtic and secular woman, and the question of arranged marriages being of a contentious place between Asian and secular cultures, she doesn't necessarily seem to jump in to defend her marriage here, but she does move into a faster pace and louder volumes in these moments. And this suggested or indexed that she wanted to make clear her agency in being able to speak with him on her own terms and define and decide from there. This can be seen in the following few lines. What did you? I ask. What did your family tell you about him? She says in line 29. My family didn't tell me much about him. When I first went, I got to know him myself. So we got to know by talking. That's it, really. And this knowledge about, to me, she was communicating knowledge that she had agency in this Asian arranged marriage. But she wasn't necessarily proving something, but she was communicating a knowledge. And this was contextualized through her variation. So Uzma's British West Midlands variety with Bengali and Sylheti as additional languages could also be seen in her morphosyntactic variation. For example, in line 9, returning to the beginning, line 9, she says, were newly married couple, and where she misses the indefinite article. And in her discussion of Bengali, Stokes shows, I'll just go to this page, that in most contexts, determiners are not obligatory and there's no equivalent of an indefinite article in Bengali. Similarly, when describing about couple of weeks in line 18, married, then I stayed about couple of weeks. She misses the indefinite article. However, includes in a second time in line 20, just a moment later. And this inconsistency suggests that the combining of her British West Midlands variety with Bengali at times, and kind of a fluidity between them. And additionally, she uses after, before, when, in after when I got married in line 8, returning to the first page. After when I got married. And this suggests a duplication of subordinating conjunctions. Bengali includes postpositions after the noun phrase rather than prepositions, which may have influenced this variation from the West Midlands standard or Birmingham standard. In this instance, Uzma's variation isn't enough for performativity, I propose here. She was also engaging co-presence with me as her spectator. And this co-presence encouraged generosity in the interaction, where Uzma could lean into her variety, be bold with stating her story of arranged marriage, while relaxed in a slow, careful, and meandering conversation with me. And I was affected by this co-presence, and thus her linguistic and embodied resources have stayed with me in the transcription process and writing her within this play. She made an impression. And performance philosopher Lynette Hunter defines performativity as a place where the socio-situated generates processes for ulterior becoming, knowing and valuing, suggesting the effects of performativity become the places where alternatives to socioculture can emerge. So across these 3 minutes of this interaction, the affect of Uzma's performativity was being known through the even rhythm of her speech, her gaze, her close proximity to me, the breathiness of her vowels, echoing this statement by Hunter. Her voice seemed uninhibited in that she showed less repetition of words, which was a marker of a lot of her testimonies when the other women were there with us. And the combination of her social variables from this interaction held me in this moment with her, as though she wanted to tell me everything, but didn't really know where to start. Her knowledge that she and perhaps women like her do have agency in arranged marriages, and that beyond this suggestion, her parents didn't have much to do with it, could be shared in the context of this pace, rhythm, vocal variation, and indexed comfort. So moving on from there, this is the script and the current draft of the current second draft of the same moment. And so you'll see from the highlighted terms that a lot of these moments of variation, mostly morphosyntactic in this particular scene, have been patterned and brought in when I have been obviously cutting something that was a very long monologue of, let's say, overall, I think it was about 15 minutes down to just a few, or maybe 5. And so here, you might start to see like some of the decisions that I've made. Uzma's variation in this interaction was patterned through both editing her piece down on the moments she was most affective with her performativity and the inclusion of the morphosyntax of her variation. And across the same text, upon including other characters into the interaction, I kept the double subordinating conjunctions after when, as you will see, and then a duplication in and it was really nice. And as well as married, stayed, and with the missing we stayed married. And so I might just move between these two and return back to that. Additionally, with the stage descriptions, which you can see, sorry, I will be just moving between these two slides to be able to finish this analysis. But I've written
a time check, Claire. We are at 5 to 6.
No problem. I will be finished in the next few minutes. I've written in stage descriptions, or what's often called the mise en scène, such as Sarah drops the rug below them, and then these terms which it's not as common, like nostalgically, confidently, before Uzma's text, because I'm trying to pick up some of the confidence and certainty and like sense of self that was communicated to me in and through her performativity, which aren't necessarily just picked up in the audio. And so I'm trying to kind of then transcribe that in, maybe to some effect, but I'm still playing around with that. And I'm just editing out as I'm speaking now. Okay. I think also I just want to pick up on here. I've said after Lullaby begins to be sung a cappella by the band quietly in the middle of the page, I say to the rhythm of the song. So there was a sense of the meandering nature of how she was describing this moment. And I've tried to then pick that up by the song being in the background, which will also add like certainty and emphasis to her, obviously not sung too loudly, in that she can set her words almost to the rhythm of the band. So to come back to this, the sense of variation, the variation combined with the stage descriptions aims to contextualize the comfort that I saw in the moment, into Uzma's telling of the story before she introduces knowledge about arranged marriages. By getting to know her and her context, through her variation, her voice quality and rhythm, the spectator can provide ways into her knowledge. By being affected by her performativity, I could make decisions on how this might be paired with her variation to build a context for the knowledge. So I was going to then turn to, so this is what I've just been describing. Sorry, I should have changed the page. To a brief kind of view of Sarah, who came from some of my testimonies. But the main point of this page and including this example is that I wasn't affected by my own presentations of story and song. And as a result, a lot of the that process of going from testimony into script, it does feel quite functional. And of course, that's a tension with including some of my autobiography and wanting Sarah now to be like a key driver of tension. But also there is like a lacking sense of variation that I have been able to transcribe meaningfully, except for some lexical markers such as like and kinda isn't in this particular short piece, but and I have then kind of made sure that there is kind of some use of kinda and like throughout. So that's the main reason why I was kind of really including this is so that I could then compare it back with Uzma's testimony and start to think through how performativity has been kind of a very strong part of this process. So to finalize, the performativity of Uzma's testimony offered a greater sense of the location of her knowledge, as I've mentioned, and how it's been constructed in and through the context of her life. And I believe that this methodology that I propose for harnessing the variation of women whose testimonies inform the documentary theatre project Courage Songs can help in communicating context-relevant knowledge to the spectator. Such context-relevant knowledge carried by Varieties helps to provide an understanding of why people are led to do the things that they do in the play, enhancing an understanding of people both inside and outside of the play. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions. And these are some of my...
Thank you very much, Claire. I am going to stop the recording and we can have a short discussion. Bingo, got you back.